Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be building a kind of feature request application using React. We're just going to be using React on its own, so no frameworks. You'll see up here, it says, so I'm on the build React app from scratch page and it says consider using a framework. So that's referring to like Next.js, or what React refers to as production ready frameworks. In our case, we're just going to be using React on its own because that's kind of the focus of this quote-unquote tutorial. I'm going to be building this live, so you'll see all like the mistakes I make and stuff like that. So hopefully that will actually help you learn, because that's the best time to learn is when you fix your mistakes. So if you come onto this page, you'll build a React app from scratch. It's just react.dev, and you'll see it in this like sidebar. Here, if you click on learn up here, you'll see it here under installation, and it's literally just this command here. So as long as you've got npm or node installed, then you should be fine. So we can copy this and then go over to our command line, and hopefully you can see that. I will zoom in a bit though, and just make that a bit bigger. So if you paste that in, and then where it says my-app, if you change that to whatever you want to call it, so we'll call it like feature requests, I guess. And then we should just be able to run that, and it should install everything we need. So this is going to be using something called Vite, which is, and then if it gives you like a prompt like this, just do Y and then press enter, and there we go. You can cd into feature requests, and then npm install or npm I, you can just run. Don't need the full word. And then to actually run it, you can do npm run dev, as it says here. But we actually just want to open this up in whatever text editor you want. And I'll also zoom in on this. Let me just open up like a file quickly. We'll do this. And then I'll zoom in. Hopefully that's big enough. So, as I was saying, Vite is like a build tool. So it'll kind of bring all your assets together. So like your CSS and your JavaScript and stuff. And it'll kind of bundle it all together, but it also has some other pretty cool things as well. Like it kind of provides like a development server with hot reloading. So like when you edit a file and save it, it'll take effect on the browser immediately. So like if you change like the background color and then you save it, you'll see the background color update in real time, which is pretty cool. So very useful for development. There is one other thing that I want to get, which is Tailwind. This isn't going to be a CSS tutorial, so I'm just going to use Tailwind for CSS stuff. It's really easy though with Vite. There's only a couple of things we have to do. So the first thing is there's a command here. If you go to Tailwind CSS and click like Get Started, it'll bring you to this exact page. You can do npm install and then Tailwind CSS and @Tailwind CSS/Vite. So very straightforward. So we'll just go back into our command line and run that. And then all we have to do is go to our vite.config file and then add Tailwind. So this will be the file that I've already got open. So I've got vite.config.js, as you can see, and it's literally in this plugins section here, I think. Let's just double check. Yeah, plugins and then Tailwind CSS. So we'll import that like that. And then we'll plug in, it's almost like calling a function. So Tailwind CSS and then the brackets. And then we need to actually import Tailwind into our CSS file. Now, this is where things get interesting because Vite gives us kind of, we can close this file by the way, you don't need it open. Vite gives us like an entire application, which we can, if I just go over here and I do npm run dev, we can actually have a look at what it looks like, and crypto.hash is not a function. All right. I've actually never seen that before. Where would that be? I don't even know where that would be because we've literally just installed this. Crypto.hash is not a function. It's in a node module, so probably a module that we've just installed, I guess. That's annoying. Is there a problem with Vite? By the looks of it, node module /Vite. Yeah, that's annoying because we literally just maybe something like npm run update, is it? Maybe we can see that and see if it updates anything. Error when... God, okay. Let's debug this, because you might have this issue as well. Error when starting dev server. Type error, crypto.hash is not a function. Beat React starter. So be very specific when you're searching this up. Good start to a tutorial though. It's always good to have problems with. I mean, I was on version 21 of Node, so it's broken. I don't really know how that works, but it's fine on 20. Then it breaks on 21, and then it's fine on 22. Right. Yeah. Let me see. I'll probably have to close that and then go again. Have to zoom in again. CD tutorials, and then I think it's, what did we call it? Feature requests. Node-v 22. Okay. Here's the moment of truth. npm run dev. This doesn't work. Okay, cool. Right, so we get given this URL here, which I should have just copied. Yeah, okay, cool. We can get rid of all the stuff saying that Node doesn't work. I've been using Node for close to like 8 years now, so I'm already familiar with Node not working. You can see here, count is, and then so this is storing in the state, so we've got our React app working fine. And now what I'm going to do is basically just delete everything. So we want to get rid of, yeah, basically everything. So everything in this source folder besides, yeah, we'll probably keep index.css and main.jsx. So we'll get rid of them. So index.css we'll just delete completely. And then we'll do our import for Tailwind, which is here. So import Tailwind CSS. And then in main.jsx, yeah, so you can see here in main.jsx, we're importing index.css. So that's all fine. That can stay as is. And then it's doing an import for app from the same directory, app.jsx. So we'll create that in a second. But for now, we'll kind of go over how this is all working, because it looks a bit mental. If you've never used React before, it looks a bit like what is going on. So basically, React will take control of wherever you tell it to. So in our case, you can see here it's doing create root, so that's the root of the React application. And then we're doing something that might look familiar to you. This is just JavaScript, so it's doing document.getElementById root. So what is that element? Where is that element? If we go to index.html, we'll see here we've got a div with the ID of root. So effectively what's going to happen is that when a user comes onto this page, React is going to load up, and effectively it's going to take control of this div here. So everything inside this div is going to be our React application, effectively everything inside of here. So this is kind of the root of the React application. You can see app here is that's kind of like a standard thing where app is kind of the main sort of like, you can think of it as a tree. So React has this concept of components. So you can kind of see it here as well, actually. So strict mode is a component, and then inside of that component is app. And then we'll have app, and then inside of app will be, you know, all our other components. So there'll be child components of app, effectively. That'll make more sense as we go on, but yeah, that's effectively how this works. So it's going to take control of this. It's going to use this HTML file. So this is what's actually going to get loaded up. So when we go onto the page, we're actually viewing the HTML file here. And then it's going to get, and this div is going to get populated by React. So all of our React, everything that React has, so like in our JSX, when we add JSX code, which is effectively like a kind of modified HTML, that'll get put into div, and that'll all get like done by React. So that's how that works. You can see here we've got this strict mode here, which is like, you know, what is that? Effectively, what strict mode is like a development thing. So when you've got strict mode on, React is going to tell you when something's a problem. So if you're doing something wrong, strict mode is basically going to say you You shouldn't be doing that. You should do this instead. And it's only something that happens in development. So when we build this for production, when we want to put it live, strict mode, it won't do anything. So this strict mode, it'll stay there, but it won't actually do anything. So it lets you find common bugs in your components early during development. So when this is in production mode, strict mode will have no effect. But by that point, hopefully you would have found all the bugs and stuff, so it shouldn't be an issue. And then obviously we have our index.css, which is automatically, Vite will recognize that we're importing index.css, and it will add that into the build. It will build our index.css and return that along with all our JavaScript stuff. So that's pretty cool. And at the moment, you can see, I think I might need to do a refresh on this page. Hopefully that'll work. I don't think it will work, actually, because we don't have an app. So effectively, it's trying to import this app.jsx. So we'll create that now. We'll create a new file in capital A, app.jsx. That's kind of... main.jsx has a lowercase m, but generally speaking, when you create a new component, you use uppercase. So app.jsx, I think it's like, is it camel case? It's the one where every letter begins with a capital, effectively. So this app.jsx is going to be the actual entry point. So main.jsx, technically speaking, is the entry point, but this is kind of more of like a setup thing. So app.jsx is going to be our actual entry point for our application. And if we do export default function app, and then we'll just leave it, we'll return something actually. Let's just do this. And then we'll do return. And here's the big thing that you have to do with JSX. And it's quite a weird thing. I don't think I've ever seen this done anywhere else besides like in React applications. But basically, when you want to return some JSX, you have to wrap it in like brackets. Which brackets are these? I think these are just like normal braces. So obviously you got these curly braces here. And then when you do a function and you do app, it's these ones that you need to use. So it looks a bit weird, and there's other instances where we have to use these as well, and it looks quite strange from within the code, but yeah, you have to do this, and then you can only have one root element in a component. So for example, like div would be our root element. You can also do it so that you don't have anything at all. So you do, I think they call it like a fragment. You can do that. So technically speaking, that is valid. And now we should have everything working because we now have an app.jsx here. And we're exporting as well, so make sure that when you create a component, you'll usually have one default export, which will be the actual like component itself, like the JSX for the component, as well as other stuff. So like state and stuff goes in here as well. But effectively, the return of this should be some JSX in most cases. So yeah, that should be working now. Yeah, so you can see like when we refresh it, we actually get it. So obviously we haven't got anything, but you can see that that's working. So the first thing I want to do actually is go into our index.css and just create some style. So we'll do HTML, and then we'll just do, I think it's @apply, and this allows us to use the Tailwind like utility classes. So we'll do background slate 200, I think would be good. So we want a kind of darker background. And we also want text slate 700. So we want text to be a little bit lighter than normal. And that should look quite nice. We can actually just check to see if that's applied yet. You can see the background colors changed, so that's all good. And that's basically it. We'll probably maybe a little bit later on mess around with dark mode. So we'll add dark mode. But for now, that should be it for that. So let's have a think about what we actually want to do here. Let me just create a new file, and I'll call it to-do capital maybe. Yeah, there we go. To-do.txt. So we want a user, and obviously, when I say user, I'm using that term very loosely, because technically speaking, we don't have a user because we've got no authentication and stuff, and that's kind of out of the scope for this. We want to kind of get to grips with React's functionality, not, like back-end stuff as well. So for now, we'll just leave it at there's just going to be one user, and it's going to be whoever's using that application. This is going to be like only a local application, so it's not going to store anything in a database or anything like that. Obviously, if you want to, you can follow along with this. And then maybe as a next step, you could add that ability to contact like an external API. That is very possible. You can do that with this. Obviously, like I say, it's kind of out of the scope of this tutorial, but if you do want to make it so that you can have, a backend that's connected to a database, and you make it so that you can post a feature request to your backend and then store it in a database, that's all good. That would be like a next step, depending on what you want to learn. So, like if you want to do full stack stuff, then that would make sense as like a next step. But for this application, we want to allow user to create a feature request, and it'd be important that request has a title and a description. I think description. So that's kind of our first thing. Then we want to list all feature requests. We want to allow user to vote on feature requests. And obviously there's only going to be one user, so there's just going to be one vote, but that's fine. Allow user to vote on feature requests. And then we want to order feature requests by votes. And we'll do that descending, which basically means from highest to lowest. So descending order by votes. So it should be like highest to lowest, effectively. So if somebody's got 10 votes and something's got 5 votes, then 10 votes should be at the top, because that means that that's the most requested feature. And then below that should be the one with 5 votes. So that will be our kind of main functionality. I think that's going to be about all we'll do in that regards. But I also want to, because I kind of want to showcase like as many features as possible that React has, I'm also going to be adding light and dark mode. Maybe not completely. Like I might not. Well, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose that would be actually fairly straightforward, because we could just do it from that one. We could pretty much do it all from here, I think. So actually, yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. But add theme support, right? So dark/light mode, and that'll give us an opportunity to explore a couple more of the React features that maybe we wouldn't need in this application, because this is quite a small application. So we'll need quite a few React features, but some of them will be just not really that useful for us. But if we do theme support like this, then actually there's a couple of features that we can actually fit into this tutorial. So yeah, let's have a look at. So we can get rid of that. We can get rid of this. Index.css, we'll get rid of that for now, and our to-do.txt. So allow user to create a feature request. That'll be our first thing. So it'll all start from app.jsx. Now, let's have a think about this. So we'll actually just do, instead of doing the fragment, we'll just do div as our main thing, and we want this to be class name. So that's one thing in React. Because JSX is kind of like JavaScript, effectively, class is reserved. Like it's not something you can really use. So instead, they use class name. And there are other things like that as well, where they use like a slightly different way of doing things in order to accommodate to the fact that it's JSX. You probably don't have to worry too much about that, but class name is one that you have to think about more often. So in our case, what we want is we want this to be kind of just in the middle of the website. So effectively, we want our application to be in here. I think that makes the most sense. If you've ever seen one of these feature request type applications, you'll notice that they're always kind of central. So like there's white space on either side, and then in the middle is like the actual application. So we can do that quite easily. So we should be able to do flex, width full, and if we do justify center, and then if we add like, let's say we just add a p tag here and just say like blah blah, just a load of rubbish. There we go. It's in the middle. So very cool. Then we can add another div, and we can specify. So we kind of want it to be a fixed size. If we don't do that, then like it'll be in the middle, but it could be like, so basically what we want to do is kind of fill out a certain bit of space, so that when we say like width full, it won't just fill the entire website, but it'll fill like, from like, let's say, you can see, hopefully you can see my mouse cursor. It's a bit like, it clashes a bit with the background, but we kind of want the application to be from here to here, something like that. So that when we do width full, instead of doing the entire website, it just does from like a bit in the middle. Hopefully you can see my cursor there, by the way, otherwise I'm just talking gibberish. But so we can do something like this, class name, and then I think it's like max, was it min or max width? Max width 3 XL maybe? And then if we just put like, let's just do div. And then I can kind of explain what I'm talking about here. So we'll do depth, and then we'll do background, like, we just do slate, and then 800. It's not actually going to look like this in reality, but we'll do width full, and then we'll do like height 16. Hopefully we can see that. Okay, we can't see that. Oops. Is that just because background slate 800? Does it need to be min width? Oh yeah, there we go. So you can see that our application's taken up. I don't think min width is right though, is it? So I think what we need, I think we do need max, but we also need content in here. So we just put a p tag and say hello. Width full. Okay, max width. Min width. Trying to remember what it is now. So max width is basically saying that it can grow to that much. But minimum, we wouldn't want it to go above the minimum. So we wouldn't run it. Yeah, we want max width to be like that. Try to think of how I do this normally, because I've done loads of stuff like this where it's like, especially authentication, I do like where I'll do the authentication thing. So like the sign up bit is like in the middle. I do that a lot. I forget what I do normally. So max width. Maybe it is min width that I normally do. I don't know. Okay, I've just double checked with something I did before, and it is minimum width, so that is right. So we'll do min width 3XL, so that should be fine. And then inside of here we'll have our applications. So let's have a think about what we actually need in our application. So if we think about it from the, I really shouldn't have gone with this color because it's kind of hard to. I want to use the cursor to kind of show where things are going to be. So hopefully you can see that, but. In the top of the application, I want basically a couple of text boxes, one for title and one for description. And then below that, I want the feature requests. So they'll be in their own kind of box, and then it'll be kind of down the page. So each request will get its own little box. And then there'll be another box inside of that that lets you vote. So we need, let's say we need 3 components. So if we create a new folder, and we'll just call it components. And then inside of here, so we need a component for create request. Oh, I think I've just created a folder there. I mean to do that. Delete that. Create a file. Call it create request.jsx. So this will be where we actually create our request. Then we need a new file called list request. So this will be responsible for like looping through the requests. And then when it loops through the request, we need another component to actually put inside of that loop so that and then it can display each request. So we'll do a new file called, we can just call this request.jsx, and that should be fine. So the first thing we'll do is do create request and kind of handle all the stuff to do with requests in that regard. So let's do the kind of first thing you normally do when you create a component, export default function. And then we'll call it create request. So the function name is usually the same as the actual component. And then that needs to return. And we'll just have it returning a div, empty div for now. And then inside of our app.jsx, we can import that. So if we do import and then create request, it should automatically, well, if you're using VS Code, it should automatically like finish that off, so you can just press enter and do create request from components, create request. And then in here, just do create request. And because this React component doesn't have anything inside of it, it is a self-closing tag. So we just do slash and then the closing tag. If this was Sorry, my voice. I'm losing my voice here. If this was a component that had like stuff inside of it, so like in here, like strict mode has components that can go inside of it, then you would have to do something like this, where you've got strict mode and then a separate closing tag / strict mode, sort of how you normally would in HTML. So like when you have a div in HTML like this, you have a corresponding closing tag. But if your component doesn't do that, then you can just do / here, so you can kind of, it's a self-closing tag effectively. So that create request, that should be fine. So in here, what we need is we need the ability to add a title and a description and then submit that. So do that. Should we make this a form? I think we should make this a form. That makes it a bit easier. So we'll do form. Then inside of here we need an input. So we'll do input. And this is a self-closing tag, funnily enough. And then we need a text area. Text area. Not text path, text area. And I think that's self-closing as well. So yeah, now that we've got that sorted, we need to have a think about state. Because obviously, we've got two inputs here. One is going to be for title and one's going to be for description. So we need to figure out the state of, or like how are we going to store this information? So there is a React hook, and a React hook is basically a way of, obviously they call it hook, and you can think of it as a way of hooking into functionality that exists. So for example, in this case, we've got React functionality called state. So the way that we use state is by using the React hook use state, and that allows us to take advantage of that React functionality. So there are other hooks as well. So for example, there is something in React called context, which hopefully we'll get to a little bit later. And in order to use context, you have to use the React hook use context. So effectively, that is all a hook is. It just allows you to use functionality. You can even create your own custom hooks. So for example, in the past, I've created hooks for input. So I've created this functionality, which is called input. And then to use that functionality, I create a hook called use input. And that allows me to kind of access that functionality. So hopefully that makes sense. That's all a hook is. It just allows you to use functionality that React or that you've created yourself. So in here, we can do state, and we want to build up a request. So what we could do is we could either do it as a request object, or we could do the state as like separate things. So I'll do that out. Like I'll write that out as for demonstration purposes. But I'm going to go with the object because that makes a lot more sense in this case, I think. But because it's related, so having a request object makes sense. But you could do something like this. You could do const and then brackets, and then the first thing that you get from the hook. So this brackets is basically it's destructuring. So what the use state hook is going to do is it's going to return two values in an array. So you can destructure that array and get the two values from it, similar to how you might do it with an object. So you might have seen destructuring objects in JavaScript where you do something like, if you had like a person object and you can get name, email, and then later on you can do like name. So you've got name kind of separately from that object. You can do a similar thing with arrays. So the first value that we get from the useState hook is the actual value itself. So in this case, let's say it's title. And then the second value is actually a function that allows us to set that state. And then you can call it whatever you want, but the normal way of naming it is whatever the name is with set at the beginning of it. So we'll do, in this case, we've got title. We can do set title. And then that's equal to use state. And then that's a function. And inside of the function, you can put the kind of initial data that you want. So in our case, it would be empty because we don't actually have any data. So that's one way of doing it. Yeah, we want to do it as an object. So we can actually just call this request. And then we can do set request. And then we can do an object with the initial values. So in our case, it'll be title as an empty string. And then, should we call it body or description? I think description probably makes sense. And that'll be an empty string as well. So I won't do semicolons. That's obviously up to you, but for me, when I do front-end stuff, I tend not to use semicolons. So that's just like a personal choice for me, but it's up to you if you want to use semicolons or not. So yeah, we've got this request object now in state. So that'll be initialized to an object with title and description, both of which are just set to empty strings. So now we need to hook these. Oh, I probably shouldn't use the word hook because it might get confusing with React hooks. But basically, we need to connect this input with title here. So the first thing we want to do is actually display whatever is in this value here. So you've probably seen value before in HTML, maybe. In our case, we want to set value to request.title. Like that. And now what we need is a function to update this state. So like that. So when we type into this input, it will get added to this title here. So in that case, we need, I think it's on update or something like that. Update on change. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So on change, and we get an event from this. So we'll do E for the event. And now what we need to do is set title to be whatever's in this input. And we get that from the event. So E will store basically the event. And what we can do is, in order to get the value, we do E.target, which refers to this input, and then value. So E.target.value. Not value, value. And that'll be the value of this input. So we need to do that way, and we need to basically take this and add it to this request. Now that sounds easy enough, because you would think that you would do something like this. Request.title is equal to E.target.value. Now that makes sense normally. If you were writing just normal JavaScript, then that would make a lot of sense. That is what you would do. However, React works a bit differently because React is managing the state, so you effectively have to do things in a way that works with React. This doesn't work with React. You have to effectively say, and this is one of the kind of, I think one of the more tricky things to get right with React, or one of the trickier things to understand is how React manages state. Effectively, what you're saying is, when you call this set request function here, or any state updating function, what you're saying is, I want this to be equal to this, right? So let's just do set request E, and it wouldn't just be E.target.value. What we want to do, and this is where it gets really confusing, is we want to pass in the request again, but with the updated value. So for whatever reason, and it's just the way that React works behind the scenes, if we did something like this, request, and then maybe like dot title is equal to E.target.value, that doesn't update properly. What we need to do is basically pass in the value as a whole into this function that will then update the state. So in order to do that, we need to do something like this. So we've got an object, so we effectively need to pass in, we effectively need to pass in a new value into React. So how would we do that in this case? We need to populate this new object that we're passing in, that's going to become the new request effectively. And we need to make sure that we only update what we want to change. So we can use the spread operator. If we do this, request, so that'll effectively add everything that's in the current request state to our new object that we're going to be passing into set request. But we obviously want the title to update. So we set title to e.target.value. So now what we've done is we've created a new request object, and it's automatically populated all the values from the previous request object up here. And I say up here, but this is only like initially, right? React is going to keep track of request and what the state of request is. So effectively, the current state of request is being passed into this new object. And then what we're going to do is we're going to overwrite title with whatever the value of this input is. And then that new object is then going to become the new request state. That makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So when we change request, and I don't know if I have, I'm just trying to, do I have, yeah, I don't think I have it installed on here. Let me just see if I can, oh, you can see our text box there. I need to get rid of that actually. So I want to show you what it's going to be equal to, but I need to grab, I don't actually know how you do it on here. Is it here? Oh yeah, I think this is it. So we need extensions. If you find an extension, you can do this on Chrome. I'm on Firefox at the moment. But yeah, you're looking for React developer tools. So whatever browser you're using should have its own version of this. So we'll just add this, and then you'll be able to see the state. So I could also do with, because I don't think you can see the input, can you? But it'll be here somewhere. Where is it? So we've got form, we've got this input here. Oh yeah, there we go. So I need to add some design stuff to that. So if you just refresh, if you just get rid of that and maybe do it again, and it might show up. Might need to refresh the page. We'll do inspect, and then we can see we've got this component here. So click on components, and you can see we've got app, which is our main component, and then we've got create request, and you can see in here, and I don't know if I can zoom in a little bit. Oh, yeah, I can. There we go. Cool. So you can see this, and this is actually showing our React application, which is pretty cool. So we've got app here, and we've got create request here. And then you can see here we've got state. Now that is showing the state of our request. Pretty cool. And if we type in here, we can see our state gets updated. And it also shows up in here. So the text would actually only show up in here if we'd set everything up properly. Because effectively our input, as far as React is concerned, is only showing the value of this request state. So if we did this, if we got rid of this value here, and we started typing, it shouldn't really work. Or at least, 1 second. That is still working though, so maybe you do need that though. Or you should need it anyway. Maybe you don't need it then. I don't know. That's a weird one, that, because I think normally you need, like I've done it before where I've set it up where the component, it doesn't, it might be something to do with this maybe. If we got rid of that just temporarily. Yeah, I don't know about that actually. That's strange, because normally, like when you learn React, it says to do this. Add the value and then set it to whatever the state is. So yeah, I don't know about that one actually, but I usually do that anyway. I think there is a reason why you do it, but I don't quite remember what it is. So yeah, it's up to you, I guess. But yeah, if we type in there, we can see that it updates the state here. If we did try to do it so that request.title, that shouldn't work. So if we do request.title, set that equal to this. And we'll see if this actually updates. Do I need an extra? Oh, okay, yeah, it's because I've left, yeah, never mind. So if we did something like this, and we looked at our state, oops. You can see, yeah, you can see it's not updating now. So I think what's happening, or what might be happening, is, yeah, so you set value. Yeah, I think I'm getting it now. Okay, bear with me. I swear I have used React for like 5 years. It's just sometimes stuff with React, like the state management and stuff, can get like really strange. But yeah, basically you'll notice here that when we type, nothing's actually happening, and it's because this value isn't updating. So if we got rid of this here, the value that would work now. Obviously, it wouldn't update the state, although title is set to H for some reason. But I think is it just? I don't know why that is. For some reason, title is set to H down here. But let me just refresh that and see what it's doing. Cause I feel like I know what it's doing, but oh, no, I guess not. No, but anyway, that might have been from the last like when it was working. But anyway, so basically you'll see that it's typing now, and that's because it's showing the value from HTML, not from React. If that makes sense. So if we set it to do value equals and then request.title, it's going to show the value from React state, not from HTML. So obviously when we type, the state's not being updated, so it's not showing anything there. But if we make our onChange function work properly, so if we just kind of undo all these changes, and obviously you saw beforehand that request.title equals to e.target value doesn't work. It doesn't update the state. It's very important that you update the state properly, because effectively what happens is with state in React is it gets added to like this queue system. So React will go through and update the state, and it will update it to effectively when you pass in values to state, you're saying that I want the state to be equal to this when the next render is complete, I guess. Or when the next state update is complete, I want the state to be equal to this. So in our case, we want the state to be equal to request, right, our request object, except we want the title to be equal to whatever value is put into here. So when React does its state updates, then it will set it to whatever's in here, as we would expect. So let's change the style a little bit here. It looks awful. So if we do class name, we'll do width full. Actually, I want to wrap the entire thing. I wonder if I should do that on the form. Yeah, let's just do this. So we'll do padding 3. We'll do background slate maybe 50. And we'll do rounded, and we'll add a shadow. See what that looks like. There we go. And actually, I wouldn't mind at the top as well. We go back to app.jsx. If we just do something like, maybe like margin 6, just to kind of push everything down a little bit. Is that going to work, or is that maybe padding 6, PB6? Oh no, it'll be PT, sorry. So it'll be MT. Yeah, is that right? Is that right? Yeah. We'll probably do a little bit more than that, so we'll do like 12. There we go. And if we go to create request again, and we just update this, so we'll do width is going to be full. We'll do PX3, PY2 maybe. And we'll do this as rounded. And should we add a border? We'll add a border, and we'll do border slate 300. There we go. And I think should I add more padding there? That seems a bit, not a lot of padding. In fact, did I add any padding? I did add padding, didn't I? I need a word wrap on here. There we go. I did add padding 3. I'll probably say like maybe PT or PX, sorry. PY. There we go. PX6. That might be a bit much. I think we'll just do P4. We'll just stick with that. This isn't meant to be a design video. Yeah, we'll just go with that. That's fine. And then effectively that we can probably add all that to this one as well. This one at the bottom, the text area. Let that pop up. So this text area, and then we also need to do, I think, resize none as well to get rid of that little thing on the bottom of it. So you can see there was like that little thing there that lets you like resize it, but if we get rid of that. And I'm also going to add MB4 as well on that, to add some space between these. And then I might add a little placeholder too, just to make it look even nicer. So placeholder, please enter a title. and then placeholder on here as well. Please enter a description. Cool. So now the interesting thing is that the way that we update our state for our text area is basically the same thing. So if we just grab this, we grab the value and the onChange event, and we'll do request.description. And then onChange will be set request, except this time we'll just change title to description. And that should, all being well, if we just give that a quick refresh, and we create request here, we can see we've got our title and description. So let's see if these update. So we've got, yep, and then description. Yeah, so that's our request object. Very nice. What I'm going to do actually is just add some text here as well. So add it here. Create a request, and we'll do like class name text XL, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, we'll need like a bit of a MB2, and we also probably want to do like font bold, maybe. Create a request, that looks all right. And then right at the bottom of this, we need a way of actually submitting our form, which is going to be in the form of a button. We'll do a div, and we'll do class, because I want the button to be on the right-hand side, so we'll do flex. And then we'll do justify end. And effectively, this will put everything at the end of our flexbox. So the flexbox should take 100% of the width up, so from like here to here. Because obviously we've got the padding there, so it should be basically the same width as this text box here. And then right at the end of it, we should have our button, because we're doing justify end, so it'll just go up right here. So hopefully this works. Button. Okay, butto, never mind. Button. And then we'll close that. And we'll just call that like create. And then we'll do class name, and then we'll set it to, so background green 500. We'll do text slate maybe 50. Then we want some padding on this, so we'll do px4 py2 so that it's sort of longer than it is like height, longer than it is wide, I suppose. And then we also maybe want to make it rounded as well. Let's just see what that looks like. Okay, that looks okay. I might make text a bit bigger though. Text LG maybe. That's fine. I mean, it looks a bit, I don't know. You wouldn't ship this and be like, "Oh, this is amazing." I'm just gonna add an MB4 here as well, just to push everything down. So we've got create here. And then we also want to make it so that the mouse cursor turns into a pointer when we hover over it. So cursor pointer. There we go. And also, if we do hover and then we do background green, and then maybe should we make it lighter? So if we hover over it, oh, and also transition colors. So now it should kind of, instead of going straight to the lighter green, it should transition slowly. There we go. So that looks all right. It's not the, should I call it, I just want to make it a bit wider is all. So maybe if I just call it like create request. Yeah, I think that looks better. I like the wider button, that looks better. So now we have the ability to create our request, which is pretty cool. So we can put that like that. And our request gets populated, so our state updates, and now we can do something with that. So we want to basically have somewhere where we can store the state. I'm thinking that this maybe should be MB2 actually. I know this is, like I said, this isn't a design course, but if this is MB2, then maybe the thing at the top of it is MB2, or there's a 2. What is it? Is it they do it? It's not like 2 pixels. It's like 2 of the other thing. And then this one should be 2 as well to keep so that this and this button here are like the same distance away from the inputs, I guess, if that makes sense. But I think that looks nicer, doesn't it? I don't know. Let me know. This isn't. Feel free to do whatever you want with the design, because I'm not really a designer. But yeah, so we've got this create request component. it's kind of ready to go, ready to like store this request somewhere. So where would it make sense to store this request when we create it? Well, it would make the most sense if you think about how we're going to lay this out. So we haven't done this yet, but we've got this list request component. Now, given how we want this to lay out, so we want this bit up here to be where the user creates a request, and we want this bit here to be where we show all the requests. It makes sense that list request is going to be basically under here. So list request here. Now, we haven't actually created it yet, so we can't really import it yet, but it'll be under here, which means we want the requests to be stored in somewhere where this create request and the list request kind of has easy access to it. So, because we need, when we create our, it's basically going to be an array of objects. So it'll be an array of request objects. We need a place where we can easily add to that array, so from create request. But we also need a way of being, we also need to be able to read from that array so that we can list all the requests. So it makes sense to have it up in app, because that's kind of the create request and list requests are going to be, they're going to be child components of app. So if we've got shared data, then it makes sense to put it in app so that both the child components can access it really easily. Otherwise, if we stored all our requests in like create request, it's going to be a massive pain. We won't be able to get them up. It's going to be, well, I think technically speaking you can somehow, but it's a very difficult thing to do. So having it in like a central location that can be accessed by the children of the parent component is much easier. So in here is where we would store our requests. So let's do that. We're going to use state again, as we've already done. So you should be all over this one in regards to like how to actually use it. So we'll call it requests. So this will be the value, and then set request. And this will be equal to use state, and the initial state is obviously going to be just an empty array because we don't have anything yet. So this is where things get interesting. This set requests here is of course where requests are added to our request state. So which of our functions, or which of our components, sorry, need this function? Well, create request, because that's where we're going to set the requests. Create request is going to be basically in charge of this function in a sense. So we need a way of passing that function into here so that we can use it in this component. Well, if you go up here to create requests, and inside the brackets we can do an object. So we're going to use object destructuring. I mentioned here with the arrays here, so it's kind of similar to that. And we want to basically get the function. We want a way of passing down that set requests function to here. So all we do is do set requests in here. So that's going to be expecting something called set requests to be passed into create request. Oops, didn't mean to move that. So if we go back up to app.jsx, obviously we've got set requests here. How do we actually pass that in? Well, components have something known as props. And props are effectively values that you pass down into a component that can then be accessed by that component. So in a case of create request, we want to pass down set requests as a prop. So we do set requests, and we're going to set that equal to set requests. Obviously, I'm repeating the names here. So technically speaking, you could call it something else like add request and then set it to set request, but this is fine. This works completely fine. So set request is going to be equal to this set requests function, which obviously updates the state. So in create requests, we now have access to set requests, which is up here. So effectively, what we're doing is controlling the state of requests from within our create request function. And that's how you would handle things like a child component controlling the state of a parent component, is you would pass down some kind of function, and you know, it doesn't need to be like a state thing. You could just create like a function separately. So a function like this, add request, and then pass that down instead. And maybe that does make more sense depending on what we want to do, but let's just go with this for now. For now, we'll just pass down set requests, and we'll see if we need to change anything, but we shouldn't do, as far as I can think. But yeah, we'll just go with set requests. And what we want to do here is make it so that we set request when we update, when we submit our form. So you can do that. Let's create a function, and we'll call it handle submit. Quite a standard thing when you have a form. Quite a standard name to call it is handle submit. So you handle the submit of the form, and that'll be fine as it is. And that'll actually take in an event. So we'll just call that E. And on here we can do on submit, and then we can call handle submit like that. So now what's going to happen is when we submit this form, it's going to call this function here. And we can actually see that in action. If we do console log and then do something like and we can actually do like e dot prevent default. So prevent, is it e dot prevent default like that? I'm forgetting now. I forget what it is now. Hang on a minute. Prevent default. Yes. Prevent default. But that's not the normal way of calling it, is it? Prevent default. So it's basically this, yeah. Alright, that's fine. Yeah, I don't know how I forgot that because I've used that so many times. So e dot prevent default. There we go. That actually looks. I was typing it out and I was like, that doesn't look right. But yeah, prevent default. So effectively, what normally happens when you submit a form is it will send a post request. So it will kind of like submit the web page, if that makes sense. Like it'll submit to an endpoint or to like a URL, right? Normally. So it'll send a post request to your URL, and then whatever handles that URL will then do whatever it needs to do next and like redirect somewhere else or redirect back to the page. So it'll basically be handled on the server side. In our case, we don't want it to do that, so we just put prevent default so it stops that submit happening. And then we can basically handle everything ourselves. So like after this point, prevent default stops it from doing what it would normally do, and then we can just add our state to requests. So or update our state using set requests later on in the function. But what I want to do is just show you that it actually works. So if we go back to our browser and we go to console, and we do that, we should see R in the console, so it's called handle submit. Now, you'll notice something here. If we do create request, and actually you can't really see it there, but that number is actually updating. Can I just clear the console? There's so much stuff in this console. Actually, if I just add something in like that and then do it again. There we go. So you can see that R is being called again, but we haven't actually entered anything. So we can actually get around that. So if we do, the first thing we're going to do is effectively some validation, right? So we can do if request.title, and actually we want to put an exclamation mark here. And then we do or, sorry, not an and, we do or request.description. We want to return. So we want to not do anything effectively. If either the title or the description is empty, we don't want to do anything. So if we put this R after it, like that, like that, and then we try again. As you can see, it doesn't do anything. Nothing gets printed to the console. And then if we put in our title, nothing happens. Put in our description, then it submits. So a bit of like data validation there. Just a very basic validation. You could also check like the length of the title and stuff like that, but that's probably more of a back-end thing that you would want to do that. But so you don't have to really worry about that here. So now what we want to do is add our request to the state, right, to the request state. So effectively in this case, what we want to do is add a new request to our array. So if you think about how this works here, so we've got this set request down here, you can see that when we wanted to update an object, we effectively needed to create a new version of that object and then add in just what we wanted to change. So with that in mind, how would we add a new object to the array? Well, effectively we want to create a new array with all the pre-existing values and just add in a new request object. Sounds easy enough. There is something I want to do first though. and it's actually important to this function. It's more important to something we're going to do later. I want to manage the state for basically an ID. So I need some kind of ID to add to the request so that I can. It'll make a lot more sense later, but I need some kind of unique identifier for each request. So if we just create a state for that, you don't need to worry about this too much now. I'll sort of explain why this is useful when the time comes. But we want ID, and then we just want set ID like that, and that'll be use state, and then we'll start it off at 1. That should be fine. So effectively, what we want to do is, well, the first thing we want to do is add ID to our request. So we should probably do something like this. Const. Probably don't need to do it. Actually, we'll just do set requests like this. And as I mentioned a second ago, what we're trying to do here is create a new array effectively to then pass into set requests, so that this new array that we pass in will become the new state. So we need to add our request object to this array, and then that will become the new state. So we've got an array, and we can effectively do the same thing we did down here with the spread operator. So we can do dot requests. Actually, I guess we do need to pass in requests. So funnily enough, we also need requests to be able to do this. Actually, see, that's exactly what I was thinking then. When I was saying in app.jsx, we could actually just create a function. This is why I was thinking it, because in my head I knew that this was going to be a thing. Right. So this is the issue we're having here. In order to do set requests, we basically need to create an array using the already existing requests, which means using this here, this requests value here, which would mean passing in requests into here. Now, that's fine, and you can do that. That's not really an issue. It just seems a bit much, right? It seems like it'd be nice to just handle the adding of a request from one location, and maybe that could be added somewhere else as well. Not that we would ever do that, but it could be called from another component, or it'd just be nice to have it in like one place. So what I think would be better is if we had a function in this app.jsx that handled adding a new request to our requests array. And that makes sense because it means that we would not have to pass down this requests or set requests to create request. We would just pass down this one function, and effectively we would pass in a request to this function and then we would call set requests from within that function, right? So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. We'll write it out now. So we'll do function add request, which is what I mentioned earlier. I already kind of had it in my head that this was going to happen. And that's going to expect a request to be passed in. So from here, now we can do the set requests stuff. So we'll do set requests. And that also means that this function here becomes a lot more simple, because now we just build up the new request object when we're passing it into this this request function here. And again, that'll make more sense. But what we'd have to do, right? So we'd have to pass in requests here. So we need requests like this. So we're passing in another value into this function, which if we can avoid it, would be good. So we need that. And then we would have to add in a new object. But then we would have to do this, request, and then ID would be equal to ID up here. So that looks a bit complicated, but now what we can do is do add request like this, and then do this. Dot request. And then ID. So add the ID as well. That's a bit simpler, I think. So we're in this one we're like doing an array with a spread operator and then another function with a spread operator. In this one we're just doing another object with the spread operator, adding the ID as well. But in this one we can just pass in the new object, spread operator, to get all the data from request and put it into this new object, and then add the ID as well. So that's a lot simpler, I think. And it means that up here we just need to do add request instead. and then we can call add request from here. So that's a much more simplified version of that function, and we're not also then passing in all of the requests to this, which I think, and I might be wrong on saying this, so don't like quote me on it, but React is very clever, right? React will update functions if some state updates, and it will re-render, right? So this is where things in React get quite tricky to kind of think about, is that when state updates, React will re-render a component, and it will re-render every component that relies on that state. So for example, if requests update, then app will get re-rendered, but then it will check to see if any of the child components use requests. So if we did this, requests equals requests, React would see that and think, oh, okay, create request relies on requests, which means we also need to re-render create request. Obviously, it doesn't, if we do it the way that we're doing it now, it doesn't actually need requests, which means we can get rid of that. Create request doesn't re-render, because React looks at it and is like, oh, create request doesn't need to know about the latest state of requests. So it stops a re-render. Just, something to bear in mind. I think that's how it works anyway. You don't quote me on that. So basically, we need to pass in add request into here. And our add request actually also becomes really simple as well, because now all we need to do is get the current array requests, the current value of requests, which is already in here. So we don't need to pass it down into the child component, because we're doing it all here now, and it's already here. And then all we need to do is add request. And there we go. And then it sets the new request. Set requests equal to whatever request is before plus the new request. Easy peasy. And if we go to create request, we also need to update our ID. And this is where things get even weirder with React. Let's do set ID. And now, when you think to yourself, how do we increment this ID? You would think to yourself, ID++, like that. But actually, that doesn't work in React, or at least I don't think it does. Maybe we should give it a try. But as far as I'm aware, that won't work. So if we just do add request, so that should all work. Handle submit, yeah, I think that should all work. So if we go back to our components, so we see create request, and if we go to app as well, we can see we've got state here, which is our requests. So we go to create request, you can see we've got this state here, which is just equal to 1. That's our ID. If we create this, and if all goes well, we should be able to see in app, our state is updated. So we've got a request, title, description, which is what we've put in, and then we get the ID of 1. Awesome, that's what we want. However, you'll notice that the state of ID didn't update, because we did ID++. You have to be very... You can't rely on something like that, because it kind of... When you do an increment, it does it like after the fact, but what you're effectively doing here is you want to pass in the value that ID is going to be when the state gets updated by React. You're basically saying, I want the ID, the new ID, to be equal to ID plus 1. So you have to be very specific about it. There's also another thing that you might want to consider, which is if you wanted to do this multiple times. Let's say we did this. Now, we'll check and see if this works, but ultimately the ID should become, so it'll update once, and it'll become 2, 3, 4, and 5. So let's do one request, and our ID should become 5 after one request. So let's see. We'll go to create request, and we'll see ID here is 1. Let's create a request. But the ID is now 2. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Because why is it not done ID plus 1, ID plus 1, ID plus 1? Well, it technically has. But React is again, it's React being clever. React views these state updates as redundant because they're the same thing, right? They're all doing the same thing. So they're duplicate state updates. And like I said, the state gets added to a queue, and then that queue will process the state updates. But it will look at these and think, well, these updates already exist on the queue, so they're duplicate updates, so we don't need to do them. So how do we make it so that we can do updates like this where we have to do multiple in a row that are updating effectively the same thing? And there are scenarios where that happens. It happened to me recently, but I don't remember what it was. But let's say that we want to increment the ID by 4 for some reason. If we want to do this, we have to pass in a function, and I think they call it like an updater function. And it's just this, right? So let's say we get old like this. And we'll call it old ID just to be specific. So we get the old ID. So the value that gets passed into this function is whatever the previous value of the state update was. So you can do this first. That's fine because that's its own function, right? So this wouldn't be viewed as a duplicate function. So it'll run the ID plus 1 initially and update it by 1. So it'll set it to 2 in our case. And that's fine. But then every subsequent state update that does this will fail because it'll be a duplicate one. But if you pass it in like this, where you're doing a function, you're basically saying, ignore the duplicate. I want this. I want it to work like this. So you have to be very explicit sometimes with the React. So when you do this and you're explicit about what you want to do, you're basically saying, no, I want it to redo this state update. And you can use the old value. So effectively, old ID will be equal to whatever gets set here, 2 in this case. So we're basically going to say old ID plus 1. And that'll do that state update. And then we can do, and then these two will be duplicates, so these won't work. But if we do this, and then we do this, so effectively old ID in this case will be set to whatever the result of this state update was. And then old ID here will be the result of this one. So by the end of it, we should actually get to the number that we wanted. So let's give it another try. Refresh it, and we look at create request. You can see it's set to 1. Enter title, enter title. Okay, I pressed it twice there by accident. Let me just redo that. So you can see it's set to 1 again. There we go. Now it's set to 5. So it's actually done the state updates in the way that we would expect it to. So React will get rid of duplicate state updates effectively. It's very smart about that. So you just have to be careful about that. You can pass in these update functions, get the old state. Like it's basically the old ID in this case, or the old state is whatever the state is at that point in time as it's ran through the queue. So yeah, so at this point, if we do it the first time, this will set it to 2. Old ID will be equal to 2 here. Then we do 2 plus 1. So then it'll be 3 in here, 3 plus 1, and then it'll be 4 in here, 4 plus 1. So that's how you do that. I thought I'd throw that in. It's not really something we need, but that is, if you want to do multiple of the same type of state updates, like in a row, you need to do something like that. You'll need to do the update function. So hopefully that helps for the future if you ever run into that scenario, which I'm sure you will at some point. So set ID plus 1, and this works. We've just tested it. So then the next request that we make should be equal to, the ID should be equal to 2. And then the next request, 3, right? So we get this unique identifier, which we can use later on when we're doing the votes, right? That's what it's going to be used for. So one last thing. We want to effectively reset our state up here, because obviously when we submit this, as you can see, it keeps the old title and description, which is no good. So what we want to do is do set request, and then effectively we can do this, and we just need to do basically the same as whatever's in here, so that when we submit it, it gets set to empty. So we do submit. There we go. Please enter a title. Please enter a description. Cool. And that's pretty much it. That is not completely like for the video, but for the create request part, that's it. That's all you really need to do. So not the hardest thing in the world. There's a few things with React, like I say, that are a bit weird. The way that it handles states, re-renders and stuff like that. As I mentioned, re-rendering being based on state. So when state updates, it'll re-render. But there are certain things you can do to kind of optimize that to make sure actually maybe it doesn't need to re-render, so don't bother. But we'll go into that a little bit later. So for now, we want to list our requests, right? We want to show our requests just below the actual request input box. Fairly straightforward. Let's create our list request component. So if we do export default function, list requests. Oh, list requests. And now, right off the bat, we kind of have an idea of what we're actually going to need here. We're going to need requests. So, because obviously we want to list the request. So, let's do that, and then we'll do return, open braces, close braces, and in here, we'll just do div, like that, and that should be. And we'll put a P in here just to say, you know, hello. Actually, we'll start off doing, so feature requests. Feature like that. And that'll start off our component, and we just need to bring it into app.jsx. So if we do import list requests, and we'll get that from components/list requests. And then just below here, we can do list requests, and then we need to pass in requests here. Requests equal to requests. And then that's the self-closing tag again. So slash. And then the closing square bracket, do people call it? Crocodile braces, I think people call these, I don't know. So list requests. So you can probably get rid of actually create requests. As far as I can tell, there's nothing more to do here. So we can get rid of that, which is nice. So to do, actually, we can update this. So done. So now we're on to this bit, list all requests. So in order to do this, we need to loop through our requests. Now, the way that this works in JSX is a little bit weird. It's going to look really weird. So we do our curly braces, which I don't think I've discussed yet, but curly braces, if you've got like, you know, let's say that we had a name here, so person name, person.name, oh, person. I hate when it does that, when it auto completes to something you just don't want. Let's say that we had a person object, and in that object we had name. If we wanted to display that in JSX, we would wrap it in curly braces, and then inside these curly braces we can access like JavaScript objects. So that is how we would do that. And it's kind of a similar thing with like looping through things. So in this case we do open curly braces, open curly brace, close curly brace. And then in here we can do a check to see if requests even exists. So we do requests, and then we do and, like this. And then we do requests.map. So basically here we're saying, like, does it exist? If it does exist, and this will always result in true, effectively. So if requests exist, then we can map through requests like this, because this is going to return the HTML that we want to display effectively. So we want to access request. We could probably just do request. Here we go. And right, I did the mistake there. I used curly braces, but I was saying that it's a bit weird. You see how in component we do return with the like normal braces. Well, it's the same thing here. If we want to return, I guess we're using JSX technically. So if we want to return JSX, then we actually need curly braces as well to indicate that we're returning something that we want to be displayed, I guess. So in here, we would do what we'd actually call request, which is our component here. But let's say that for now, what we'll do is just add like a div like this. So this, when you do things like this, when you do the requests.map in order to like loop through an array and then display some JSX as a result of that, looping through each element of the array, it works in a similar way to how this works, these components work. So these are almost like mini components in a way. So when you do this, when you do the normal braces, you then have one root element. In our case, it's div, and it's similar to here. We want one root element, and again, it's going to be div in this case. And then we want to set p like this, and we can do request dot, and then we can do title. Did I set it to? So request dot title. So hopefully, when we go here, and I don't know if we actually have any requests yet. No requests yet. If we add a request, it displays here. There we go. So our list is automatically updating. You can see in app, we've got requests here. And that's been, that request state here is being passed into list requests, which is then being I don't know why I said that so weird. Looped through using request.map like this. And then it's showing request.title. Pretty cool. One thing I do want to do actually is create some kind of, so I'll just do class name here and then I'll do like margin top 8, something like that. Yeah, there we go. And then feature requests, I want this to be a little bit bigger, so I'll do text XL. And maybe do font bold as well. Medium. Try that. Cool. I'm gonna make that a bit bigger. There we go. So do font bold. I'll just stick with font bold, I think. Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't look the best, but that's fine. So, right, I'm thinking of what I'm going to do here, because effectively what I want to do here is make it so that if there are no requests, then I want to make it so that we show some text saying there are no feature requests. Now, in this case, effectively with this, when we put requests and then this double and here, we're basically saying if requests exist, so if there's anything in this requests array, well, actually, I think that might be a bit different. Because we want to do requests. Yeah, I think because of the way JavaScript works, I think this might be a bit different because we're also, yeah. So I think this will always be true because requests is here and it technically exists. So I think the way that JavaScript does things is that if, as long as requests is set to something, even if it's just an empty array, then technically I think it's true. But I think this will always be true. So yeah, that will. Let's redo this because you can actually do. So technically speaking, this is what you need to do. Like, I think length is. If spelled that wrong, if request.length is more than 0, so effectively there's something in the array, then we want to show request.map. Although in this case it doesn't really matter because we don't have an else. So effectively, as long as this, yeah, we're not displaying anything else, so we can just leave it as this. If you've got a situation where, like this, you're just looping through requests, then the fact that there is an empty array is fine because effectively it's just not going to do anything. But if we want to do the alternate scenario where we actually want to check that there is something in the array, and if there isn't anything in the array, we also want to display some text instead. So we can do that. Effectively, a similar way, we do requests.length, as I mentioned. So now we're actually not just checking for the existence of requests, we're checking that it actually has something in the array. So length, like that. And then we do, as you might have seen, a ternary operator in JavaScript. So effectively, what we want here is, I think I'm doing this right. If there is requests, oh, actually, sorry, I did this wrong. If it's more than 0, there we go. More than 0, so if there's at least one element in the array, then we want to loop through. We do requests. I think you would normally do this on like a separate line. You do requests.map, basically the same thing that we did up here. Request.map, request, and like that. And then we'll do, I'll just copy this here. Okay. Right, otherwise, we want it to say, we want it to show a p tag like this, and say like there are no feature requests. Now you can make this look a little bit nicer, so I'll just do this, and then put this down here. So that does that look nicer? Kind of. I mean, JSX can be a little bit messy at times, but effectively, what we're saying here is if requests, and maybe we also would do something like this. Something like that. So requests exists and it has a length that is more than 0, so it has at least one element in it. If that is true, then we run this. So we'll basically loop through requests, and on each one we'll display this, so the request title. But if this is false, so if there's no request and yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So request. If there's no request and this isn't true, so if there's no elements in the array, then we'll just display there are no feature requests. So this should work. We refresh it. There are no feature requests because there aren't any. And then as soon as we add one, it should get rid of that and show the feature requests. Like that. So that's how you would do like conditionals. So if you wanted to check for the existence of something and change how you want, what you want to display based on that, you do something like this. You can make it cleaner. You can like use components and stuff like that. But this is basically how you do like a ternary operator in JSX. So, or an if-else, right? So what we want to do here is we want to use our request here. So we want to actually start to like populate that so that when we display, we can make it look nice. And it also looks a bit better than, having this. We can just have request instead. So the request like this. And then we would also pass in request. And that'll be equal to request. And that is a lot neater. But in order to do that, we obviously need to fill out request. So we do export default request. And that's going to, I need to do function, sorry. Function. And that's obviously going to take in a single request. So this is going to be like, you can think of this almost like a read-only component. This component, the user won't like, actually no, they will, won't they? Because, yeah, they'll do a vote from here. Oh yeah, okay, never mind. Ignore what I was about to say then. I was going to say the user won't interact with this component, but actually this is going to be where they submit a vote, so they will interact with this component. I was going to say it's a read-only component, so the only purpose of it is going to be to like display the request. Technically that's going to be true for now, but then a little bit later on it won't be true because they'll submit a vote. So yeah, ignore what I was saying there. But sometimes you do have these components where they're purely there to like display something. And they would work similar to this, so you would they're just normal components, but you would pass in a request, and oftentimes you would use them inside of like this, where we're actually like looping through something, and the only purpose of the component would be to like display some information, and it's completely fine to create a component just to do that. If you feel like it's a bit of a waste of a component, it's fine to do it, and it just helps keep things kind of separated and like neat and tidy and stuff, so it's fine. So what we want to do here is return, and we'll just do a div, and we'll do class width full. We don't need to set height on it because it'll kind of manage its own height. Width full. The background is going to be the same as the text box that we had, like the box here. This box here, which I think is slate 50. We'll go with that, slate 50. We'll do it rounded, and we'll add a shadow as well, just to kind of make it pop a little bit. And then in here, we want to display the title and the description. So we'll do title, request.title, and p request.description. And we'll probably want to make this a little bit bigger, so we'll do like text LG, and then we'll do maybe font medium, I don't know. Or maybe darker actually. So if we do text slate, and then at the moment it's 700, like by default, so we'll do text slate 900, and then we'll see what that looks like. So we have no feature requests at the moment. Oh, that broke everything. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. All right, so let's go back to the list requests. So here's something I didn't mention. When you have a loop like this, in order for React to properly keep track of the state of that, of these, because it's each component will get added, it needs to have a unique key, and that just helps. And like I say, that helps React keep track of this loop here, so it knows what needs to be updated and stuff like that. So React can like do things very cleverly, like I was saying. So like if you have something like this where it loops through, it needs to know what to update, and it can do that based on the key. So each of these components needs a unique key to help React keep track of everything that's in this loop. Like, so every time something gets added, we need a new key. So in this case, we actually have request.id, which is useful. So I didn't actually add the ID for this. What you can do is do something like this: index, not index.db. So when you get, is it value? Oh, I think index is second actually. So if you had something like this, you do braces, and then you do index like this. So you get the value and the index, and then you can just use index here. I don't think that's the best way of doing things. I think it would be preferable if you have some way of uniquely identifying elements other than an index. I think it might be advised that you don't use index. So using something like an ID is like much better for keeping track of things. Because obviously the index can like change and stuff if you like reorder things, but the key, if you reorder the list, but your key is like something like an ID, then that won't change. But if you change the index, but if you reorder with the index, then the index will change technically because you've reordered the array, if that makes sense. So React will struggle to keep track of like what actually needs updating. So that's a bit of a confusing one. That's a bit of like an advanced thing. Is like all you need to know is that you need to pass in a unique key. So if you've got something like requests, like we do, having an ID that's unique is the easiest way to do that. If you are in a situation where you really just don't have anything, then you can use the index, and that will that's passable, but I don't think it's recommended. I think having something that's unique to each component effectively, or each like thing in the array, each element in the array, then that is better to do it that way. So in our case, obviously we've got ID, so we'll just use that. And that should be fine. That should actually work. Let's go back to our components. So list requests, we've obviously got no requests. But then if we add this in, but it still doesn't work. Why doesn't it work now? Request constructor new is required. Where is add request? I'm not too sure what that's in reference to because it was all working a second ago. Add request JSX9. It's saying that we need a new request constructor. Oh, I think maybe request is like its own thing. So maybe that doesn't. Let me just do like new request. That was working before though, so I don't think that is the issue, is it? Well, let's just try that again. Create request. What have we just changed? Because I've just... Oh, I see what's going on. Yeah. We didn't import our request. So import request. Is that right? Yeah. Is that... I think that's why it's broken. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't do the import. That's why it was broken. Right. This doesn't look particularly good. And we also want a place for votes. So that was something that we didn't do actually. In create request, let's just add in... as well as adding in the ID, let's also add in votes and set that to 0 for now. So we'll set that 0 so that when we add a new request, we add the ID, but then we add votes as well. So we'll need that now. Because what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that we have a box that we can click to because we're displaying these now, we do need to add maybe padding 3 on this to make it look a bit nicer. And then what we want is, I'm just thinking of like a good way of doing this. So, we basically want a box. We probably don't really need to do, we need a button. That's what we need. We need a button, and that button is going to display request.vote. And in this case, we'll do class name. We'll add some padding to it. Padding 3. We'll add a border. We'll set border slate 300. 300, we'll make it rounded. And I'll make the font bold to make the vote stick out. So as you can see, we've got this here. So we need this in line. So let's do this. So we'll do div class flex. And then if we put everything inside of here, and then we do another div surrounding our text here, like that. So hopefully what that'll do is it will put these in line, and we need maybe if I do something like gap x3, maybe. Look at that. Yeah, I've just noticed that the text here is really quite small. Oh, that's the wrong thing. And then we'll do font bold on this, and we'll make it stick out a bit more. That'd still be 700, and that'd be fine. Yeah, we'll just leave that as 700. I think making it look too dark, it doesn't look particularly good. Okay, so votes is empty there because we added votes after we'd created that request, so we do that. There we go. So we'll make this maybe a bit bigger. Text LG, something like that. Okay, that's fine. I mean, we're not like trying to make it look like the nicest thing in the world. Where is that feature request here? So feature request, and then we'll add a MB4 here or something like that. And we'll also want to do, in request as well, we want to do MB4 as well, just to kind of space things out a bit. So if we have multiple requests, like this, they're all spaced out. So it's kind of coming together now. It's looking pretty good. Obviously, we can't actually vote on anything yet. Click this, it doesn't do anything. Which is obviously not great. Let's add that in now. So in requests, I'm trying to think of how would be a good way to do this. So we need to update votes. I think the way that we should do this is have, again, similar to what we did here. Obviously, we've got all of our requests in this component already. So it would be good to just manage not only the adding of a request, but also adding a vote to a request, all from this. Okay. Sorry about that. Adding a vote as well. It would make sense to have it in here. So we'll do function add vote. And this is going to be a little bit of a tricky thing. So let's have a think of. Basically, we want to know what request. Actually, we can just pass in the ID here. So effectively, what we want to do is we want to know which request we want to add a vote to. And then we need to update the state. So this gets even trickier. So we've talked before about updating an object in create request. Obviously, we've got this object here. And then in order to do that, we need to create a new object where just the things that we need updating, we can update them. So we do the spread operator. So we do an object. Spread operator adding whatever the value of the objects of that object is at the moment. So in this case, request, it'll be like title and description, it'll get added. Then we overwrite title with whatever the input value is, and then we add that to our new request state, effectively. So that's an object. Then we focused on adding an object to a pre-existing array in here. So set requests. So we put whatever the value of the array is using the spread operator, and then we add our new request to the array, and then that gets set as the new request's state. Now we're updating a specific object inside of an array of objects. So that sounds even more mental, but it's actually fairly straightforward, especially because, and this is why we did it at the beginning, we have an ID. So we can actually identify what object it is that we want to update. But similar to the other times, like in set requests, we need to create a new array and pass that in so that that becomes the new state. So that's where things get a little bit more. It's actually fairly straightforward, but it kind of seems tricky in your head. There is one function that we've already used which returns a new array, and that is map. So we can use map, because the whole point of map is to loop through each element and return a new value based on, whatever you say. So like in this case, we're returning this request component. So we can return whatever we want the new object to be, effectively, in this case. So if we want to add a vote, we can do this. We can do requests. Set requests. Requests. I cannot type. .map. A request.map. And then we've got request. And then we've got a function. And the return value of this function will be what gets added to the new array that .map builds up, right? So when you run .map, it returns. Here we go. So calls a defined callback function, which is this here. This is the callback function. It calls the defined callback function on each element of an array, and then returns an array that contains the results. It returns a new array, effectively. So what do we want to do here? If we want to update the votes of one specific component based on the ID, what do we want to do? Well, we want to do if ID is equal to, if request ID, .id, so the request that we're processing on this loop, on this iteration of .map, the ID of it, if it's equal to the ID that we pass in up here, then we want to edit this object. So what we can do is we can return a new object. We do request, but then we can do vote, and that's going to be equal to vote plus 1. Else, we don't want to do anything. So we just return request. So it just returns the request object. So by the end of this map function, it should have gone through, and for every element, it should return just the element itself back, so unedited, except the one element that has the same ID of the ID that we pass in, and in which case, we want to add a vote. And that's it. Fairly straightforward. So now what we want to do is pass this add vote function down to our request. So what we have to do, and this can be kind of a bit of a trap that people fall into in React, is that we have to pass it down to list requests, so here, but then we also have to pass it down again to request. Now, passing it down to child components is not the end of the world, but if we pass it down any further, then it would be getting a bit too much. And that's when we start to use context. Now, I'm going to cover context later. In this case, passing it down into list requests, which we'll do now, we'll pass it down into, so do add vote. That's going to be equal to the add vote function. And then in here, in list requests, we want to do add vote. And then we want to pass that down, add vote, like that. And then in request, we also need to do add vote. So, fairly straightforward, but can get a little bit out of hand when you're passing functions down into multiple child components, because obviously we're actually not actually even using it in list requests. Like, it's not, the only reason why it's in list requests is so that we can pass it into request. Now, like I say, in this case, it's not that hard to follow. You know, we pass it from app to list request to request. Not too bad. But if you encountered a scenario where you're doing that even further, or you're passing, you know, the same function to multiple child components or whatever, then that's probably a time when you want to use something called context, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, which we'll do when we add the ability to switch themes. So that'll make a lot more sense. But I just wanted to kind of warn you of that, because that is one thing that sometimes people fall into, and that is one of the things that will make your React application really difficult to work on, difficult to keep track of how it works, is when you're passing down functions like into multiple children. So it's like going down like, you know, multiple levels. So it's going down like 2 levels at this point. So, you know, that's not the end of the world, but it is something to bear in mind. As you start working on your own React applications, you want to be mindful of like not passing down functions or values to like, you know, lots of child components. But anyway, like I say, in this case, it's fine. So button, what we want to do here is we want on click. So when the user clicks the button, we want to call this add vote function. We'll do we want to do E? We don't really need to do E there, actually, because we don't need the event, I don't think. So that should be fine. So we need to call a function, and then we need to call add vote, and we just need to pass in the ID of the request that we want to update, which is obviously whichever request we're in at the moment. And then that should be fine. It should work. So vote +1, and it sets requests to the new array, the array that is the result of .map, effectively. So let's give this a try. Let's add a request. Let's click this. Okay, it doesn't work. Vote is not defined. That is because I need to do request.vote. So I need to get the vote value of the current request. So, and then add 1 to it. So if we give this another try. Hang on a minute. See, I don't know if this is so on click. Is it the on click that's not working? Add vote. Let's just do like a console log to kind of debug this and see what's going on. There we go. Okay, so it's getting into there, it's just not adding a vote. Now, why wouldn't it be adding a vote? So requests.map, request, vote. Let me just check and see what it says in our components. So we can see it here, can't we? So in state. Oh, it's because it's because I've called it votes, not vote. Right. That was my mistake. That's really dumb. Let me try this again. There we go. So we can see it's actually adding votes now, and you can see it's going up every time we click. Going up by 1. So we've got 31 votes now. So that is working as expected, which is great. So let's have a look at our to-do. So we've got list all feature requests, which is done. And allow a user to vote on a feature request, which is done as well. Do this all caps, make it easier to see. Right, now comes something that is a bit tricky, and that is the ability to order feature requests by votes. So I think this request.jsx is kind of, we're done with that now, so we can close that. So now we want to list requests, and we want to order them by votes. So I think there's a couple of places where you could do this. So effectively what we want to do is we want to, you see here where we're looping through requests. So requests.map here. Effectively what we want this, so this is just looping through the array, which is effectively looping in, or the result of that is just whatever order we put these in. So we do like, you know, that, and then we do this. It gets added into the array like one after the other. So if we do another one, it's added into the array, and obviously votes has no, like, it doesn't reorder or anything like that. So yeah, that's just displaying in the order of the array. So effectively what we want to do is loop through an array that is ordered by the votes. So not this requests array, we need a new array. to loop through. Now, the question is, where do we put that? Where do we add this function that will loop through the array and reorder them based on the amount of votes? So it could go in app.jsx. We could create a new like value called like filtered requests. That's quite a common naming convention if you're doing anything with like filtering, so like sort by or like, you know, sorting by excluding things based on certain criteria. Then you could call it filtered and then the name of the array, so requests or filtered requests, to indicate that it's a filtered version of, you know, the requests array. So we could do it there. We could do it in list requests as well. So we could grab the requests from here and just kind of change them. Now, for me, I think that makes the most sense, handling it all in here, because app.jsx is going to get very out of control if we start doing everything in here. I think either one's fine. So I think you could do filtered requests in here and then just instead of passing in requests here, you just pass in filtered requests. I think that makes sense. I think that's fine. But we can do it here just for the sake of like keeping it kind of tidy. If we were going to use filtered requests in multiple places, then you might want to do it here, because you might just want to do it here anyway, but you might want to do it here if we're going to use it in multiple places, because then you just have to do it in one place, and then you can pass it into this component, and then maybe you've got another component that wants filtered requests as well. You can pass it into that one, and so on. So keep doing that. I keep just moving stuff all over the place. Let's get rid of this R. So let's add it here. Effectively, what we need is a function that calls sort on the request array. So we'll do function, and we'll call it filter request, not filtered requests. Just bear in mind that difference. So this is going to return requests.sort, and then the sort function that I remember, I actually said it here. So we pass in A. We get the arguments are A and B, and effectively we want to compare A and B and then sort them based on. I'm just thinking this is quite an easy one. That looks quite straightforward. Could we do like this and then do A? Well, okay. Let me just do it the way that I'm going to do it, and then we'll see, because we need to do it. I think the problem that we have with the sort function is that when you look at the sort function, by default, if we like Google JS sort function, it'll show us what we need to do. I'll zoom in on this actually. So we get A and B, and then it depends on the output. So normally what it does is by default. Let me just try and find. Oh, here we go. So we've got this compare function, which is this the function that's here, basically. This is the compare function. And depending on the value we return, it will sort one after the other. So if the value that we return from this function is more than 0, then it will sort A after B. If it's less than 0, it will sort A before B. And if it's equal, it'll just keep the original order. So you can see here an example. So if A is less than B by some ordering criterion, in our case it's going to be votes, then we want to return -1. If A is greater than B, so if A has more votes than B, we want to return 1. Otherwise we return 0. Here's the problem. The compare function by default, so the way of doing it here is sorting it in ascending order, which means the lowest vote will be first, which is not what we want. So we want to do this, but effectively we want to kind of swap these around. So we'll do it now. We'll do, did it say return as well? Yeah, so if we do if A.votes is less than B.votes, we actually want A to be sorted. So what did it say here? So if it's less than by some ordering criterion, A is less than B, return -1. So -1 is less than 0, which means it's going to sort A before B. In our case, we actually want B to be first, because it means that B's got the most votes. In this case, hang on a minute. Yeah, B's got the most votes, so we want B to be first. So actually, we want to just return 1. And if we return 1, which is more than 0, that'll sort A after B. So you can imagine our array is like this. B will be first, which has got the most votes. And then A will be put after it. Else if, basically the opposite, so A dot votes, is more than B, we want A to be first. So we want to return -1. -1. Otherwise, we want to return 0. Cool. I won't put a semicolon there, and I keep putting semicolons, but yeah, normally I don't do that on the front end stuff. So now we've got this filter requests function. How do we actually use it? Well, simple enough. We just do const filtered, right? Filtered requests is equal to filter requests, and then we just call that, and it's as simple as that. So now what we need to do is instead we need to use instead of requests, we need to use filtered requests. So yeah, let's give this a try. And you can see already that 4 is above. So this should already be working. So if we do this, so 4 is equal, so those stay the same now. 5 goes to the top. If we change this, so 5, it went up, and then 6. There we go. So now it's at the top. So now it's ordering. We can just go crazy and just start ordering these. So yeah, you can see that whatever's got the most votes is now at the top. And then, yeah, so 14, 13, 11. That's working perfectly. Now, this is something I wanted to talk about, because what's going to happen here is, and the reason why this even works, why this const filtered requests works, is because every time the request state updates, which it does when we click vote, as you can see here, add vote, so we're effectively we're updating the state's request, we're updating the request's state. What's going to happen is React is going to re-render every component that relies on requests. So it's going to re-render this component, because obviously it relies on requests, or it has requests in it. Then it's going to re-render list requests, because list requests relies on requests. So when it re-renders it, what it's going to do is it's going to run through the component again, and it's going to get to here, and it's going to set filtered requests equal to the output of the filter requests function. So it's always going to do this when requests update. Now, that's fine. That's fine, and to be honest with you, for our application, that probably is never going to be a big issue in regards to performance. You don't need to worry about that. However, there may be scenarios where that does become an issue, and in that case, we need to use some kind of optimization to make it so that, because you can imagine, right? If we have 1,000 requests, every time our app re-renders, we're effectively going to loop through 1,000 requests in order to sort them. Now that seems a bit much, and obviously that's going to add up, and looping through 1,000, maybe we have 10,000, right? It's just going to take more and more time. Every time we run this function, it's going to loop through every element of the array once, and that's obviously not good. So what we need to do is have some way of optimizing that so that it will only run, this will only run if absolutely necessary. There we go. And there is actually something we can use, and it's another hook, and it's called useMemo. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this, it's not because I'm expecting you to use it all the time. I'm not even necessarily expecting you to ever use it in the future, because you might never encounter a scenario where you need it, and in our case, this scenario, we don't really need it. However, what I want to make you aware of these things which are optimizations in React, because one of the things where people can fall down a lot when it comes to React is the fact that when some state updates, React will re-render, and that can become a very costly operation if you're trying to re-render lots of stuff. So there might be scenarios where you might want to say, actually, React, don't re-render this. You might want to say don't re-render it. You might want to say, if you are going to re-render it, and this is what we're going to do in this case, don't rerun this function, just give us what the value of the function already was, because maybe requests actually hasn't changed, or at least it hasn't changed in a way where we need to rerun this function. So we can use useMemo. So if we do import useMemo like this, and that'll be import from React. And effectively what useMemo is it allows us to, again, it's a hook, so it allows us to use memo, which is a React feature, but it's also just a general algorithm optimization, and it's memoization. So you might have heard of this, you might not have. Memoization is something that's often used to kind of optimize algorithms, because effectively what it does, if you have a function that takes in, you know, oh, actually, let me just, oh no, yeah, it's fine. Sorry, I was going to say it was a function that takes in a parameter. In our case, it actually doesn't matter because we'll write it a bit differently, but don't worry about it. But basically, the idea of memoization is that if you have a function that takes in a value and always returns the same return value, if you pass something, let's say, for example, let's say we did this function sum, and that passed in, you know, A and B, and then it return A plus B. So it sums two numbers together, right? If you pass in, let's say you pass in 5 as this value, and then pass in 5 as a second value, it's always going to return 10, right? And obviously this function only doing, you know, A plus B, so that's not really an issue. But in order to memoize this function, you would check to see if that has already been done before. So, like, the first time you run this function with, you know, 5 and 5, you will obviously run A plus B, and then you'll cache that result. And the next time, oh god, voice breaks, that's crazy. The next time you run the sum function with 5 and 5 as the input parameters, it will, instead of running A plus B, it will just return the cached result. So it doesn't run the function again. It just returns a result, which, as you can imagine, is a lot faster. So in our case, if requests doesn't update, then we just return the cached value. So when it does this bit here, instead of running filter requests every time, we can make it so that it only returns the, you know, the previous result of the function, effectively. And we can do that by doing useMemo. So if we do useMemo, and that's going to be, it's going to look something like this. And then the second parameter, so the first parameter is the function that gets run by useMemo. So effectively, it's going to return, the return value is going to be whatever filter requests. And then the first time it runs this, it's going to cache the result of this filter requests. And then we can pass in dependencies. In this case, it's requests. So what's going to happen here is, when filter requests is run the first time, it's going to cache it, and it's going to link that cache to whatever the value of requests is the first time it gets ran. Then what's going to happen, if there's a re-render, it's going to look at requests, it's going to see, has this changed? Is this the same request that was used to run this function the first time? And if it is, then it will just return the value because it's already cached the value. So it'll just return the cached value. That means that it won't run this function at all. It just returns the cached value. But if it's different, then it'll need to rerun this function. So effectively what it's going to do is only rerun the function when it absolutely needs to. So hopefully that clears it up. Memoization is a bit one of those, like, it's kind of easy to understand, but it's like a bit tricky to understand how you use it in practice. But yeah, hopefully that kind of clears it up. And if you want to look into it, obviously you can search useMemo, and React does have explanations about how it works in kind of more detail. So hopefully what should happen here is, and I should also say that it doesn't actually run in development environment. So yeah, I mean, it says it here, look, useMemo will only recompute the memoized value when one of the dependencies, which is, you know, whatever you pass into this array here, when one of the dependencies has changed. So that's probably a much better explanation. There's also a link here that you can look at if you need a more in-depth explanation. So yeah, so that'll only run when requests actually updates. Otherwise, it'll return the cached value. As I was saying, this only runs in production though. It's kind of similar to in main.jsx where you've got the strict mode. It doesn't run in development because it kind of doesn't make sense to run it in development. But in production, it does make sense because in production, that's when you want the optimization to take place. So in our case, this use memo won't actually do anything. I think what it does though is it will run it twice, which is interesting. So if we do console log, and we do, just type in any old gibberish. If we do this, and you can already see it there, but if we do this and create request, you can see it ran that use memo, but it's ran it twice. And now the reason why it does this is actually for like it's to make sure that you've done it properly. It's to make sure that you get the same result every time. I think that's the idea, is that when it runs it twice, it basically runs this function twice, and then it should, if memoization is something that you can actually use, then it should give you the same result each time. So you could return, you should return the result and check, is this giving me the same result every time I run this function with that specific input? And if it does give you the same result, so effectively these two should be the same. If you return, if we return the result of this, and we could see it, so we could do const sorted, something like this, and then return sorted. But then we also did like console log of sorted. It'll run the function twice, and you can check this. You can check the output of the function using that console log, and it should give you the exact same result. And if it gives you the exact same result, then it means that memo or memoization is something that you can use, because it means that every time this function runs with that input, you're going to get the same result. So use memo is actually something you can use. If you get a different result every time you run a function, then you can't use memo, because otherwise it can't cache the result, because it's going to change every time you run it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's just something to be aware of when you're actually doing these optimizations yourself. Like I say, I mean, I've done React for like 5 years now, and I don't think I've ever used use memo. So if it's an optimization, but it's not necessarily always going to be something you need. Some people like always use it, apparently. Some people never use it. Some people just use it when they think they need it. It's up to you. I'd always recommend, if something's slow, I think the recommendation from React is try it without use memo, and if it's slow, then you optimize. If you don't need to optimize, don't bother. I think that's kind of the advice from React. Anyway, that's working now. In fact, that's pretty much everything that needs to be done. So yeah, you can add a feature request, add votes. And if we add more votes, we got 3 votes for that. It then puts it up to the top position. And we have to add a new one, 0 votes, so it goes at the bottom. 3, so it's now there. 4, it's now at the top. So that's all working. Let's have a look at our to-do list. Mark that as done. Perfect. And you can obviously do it so that like, and we could probably do it now actually, that'd be a really good thing to do. We could look at this votes here, and one of the things that you can do, have I got word wrap on? No. Okay. Obviously we've added these class names here. One of the things you can do with classes in React is use JSX in classes. And in order to do this, we need to use string interpolation. So instead of doing these double quotes, we do the kind of like, I don't know what they're called, but they're like, those single quotes that are a bit, or the backticks, I think they're called. And inside of here, we need to do curly braces first. And then inside of that, we do backticks. And now, inside of here, we can do string interpolation, which basically allows us to use JavaScript kind of within a string, and like we can append to the string using JavaScript. So what we want to do in this case is make it so that when we've voted on something, we want the background color of the vote to change. So we can do like an if statement here. So we can do like request.votes. If it's more than 0, then we want to add something like background we do background sky maybe 500? Otherwise, we don't want anything. We just want to keep it kind of as is. So, give that a go. We should be able to do this. And then there you go. You can see that we've added background color. You can add multiple classes as well. So actually, in this case, it would make sense to do text slate 50, something like that. So you can see here, it doesn't look like the best thing in the world, but there we go, that's fine. We can do another one, and we add it, and obviously you can see we haven't got a vote. Now that we've voted, it's changed the background color. So you can, so this is how you would like add CSS classes kind of dynamically. So obviously you've got all your classes that are there by default that don't require, like that don't depend on anything. That's just, these are just the default classes. And then you can add these using string interpolation and a ternary operator like that. And that's how you do classes. So I think that's quite an interesting thing. So our last to do is add theme support. Now, this is going to be a fun one, a tricky one, because we're going to be using context. So let's have a look at React. Let's have a look at managing state and passing deeply with context, because there are actually some things in here that I want to show, like on, if we zoom in a bit, you can see this better. So I mentioned this whole idea of like passing state into the app, passing state into child components, and this is actually, this image here is like the best example of that. So here's like, this is basically our app.jsx. Then we have, let's say, create request here. Then we have list requests here. And then we have request here, right? So this is how our application would look. So it would just be these few ones here. As you can see here, the state is being stored in here, and then it's being passed down into these components here, and then actually being used in this component. And in the case of this example, it's been passed down again, and then being passed down again and used in these two components. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a pain. So how do we get around doing that? We can use something called context, and context is, and this is how they kind of show it here. So using context in distant children. So as you can see, we've got the state in the context here. That's what that would be. We'd have the context up here. And then basically any child component of the context, which will obviously this will make more sense when we actually implement it ourselves. Every child component of the context will have access to the values. So instead of passing it down like we did before, where we just pass state down to, or state or a function or something down to child component, then pass it down again, then pass it down again, and then pass it down again. Instead, we can just directly access the context from each component. So we don't need to pass it down. So long as the component is a child of the context, then we can actually just access it directly from each, from whichever child component we want, which is obviously a lot easier. So in our case, we want a theme context. So if we scroll down a bit, we should see, so we do something like this. So we import create context from React, then we create our context, and then what we can do is actually create something to use, to actually like use our context. So I don't know if they've got any examples in here. Have they got let me just have a look. So yeah, there's like a specific thing I want to do. I want to wrap the context, but I don't think they've got examples of it here. That's fine. We'll go over here and we can create a new folder. So the kind of the standard way of doing it is having because sometimes you'll need multiple contexts. So what you do is you create a folder specifically for context. So if you call it context, and then in here we'll have a new file, and I think the naming convention, I mean, they called it context, but I usually call it provider because it's providing the context, if that makes sense. So I think I'll call it themeprovider.js, and we'll go with that for now. So themeprovider.js, because that's going to be the name of the thing that we export. We need to import create context from, oh, there's quite a few of them actually. Need to make sure we get the right one. Create context from React. There we go. And then we can do const theme context equal to create context. And then that's just going to be, by default, we're just going to set it to null. And then what we'll do is we'll fill in the context as we go forwards. So it's going to look something like this. So export default theme provider. Is it going to be a function? I think function. Theme. I spelled that function, which is not great. Theme provider. And then in here we're going to pass in children, and that'll make sense in a second. So effectively, well, actually, it'll make sense now. So we're going to return, and then it should be something like theme context, and then children. And once again, I spell it wrong. There we go. So effectively, what's going to happen here is everything inside of theme context is going to have access to the context values. And I could do with checking something, actually, which I did. I did something before with like an auth context, but I don't know if I actually, like, I don't think it's public. So yeah, I can't really access it from here. All right, so I've got something open on another screen. So basically, I did an application a while ago, which had authentication, and the way that I did authentication, which is a way that you would probably do it as well if you ever add authentication, is by using a provider. You would have like an authentication, or using context, right? So I'm calling it a provider because this is like the, it's providing the context, right? That's the whole point of this provider here, is it's going to provide the context to all the child components. Now, I don't know if I need to do .provider here. I think I do. Yeah. So we'll do this. .provider. And then we actually don't want to export default there. We want to export this function theme provider. But we also want to use it below here. So what we want to do is we actually want to just export this by default. Function, use theme, and then it'll be return, use context, and it'll be theme context. So the way that we use this is we wrap our application in theme provider, just like you would in any component, sort of like, where is main.jsx, so like here. Although in our case, would it make sense to, I think where it would make sense to actually wrap it. I think if we did it in here, yeah, that would make sense. Okay. That way our entire app gets access to it. The way that context works, as far as I'm aware, is that it's only the child components that have access. So if we did, and we'll do it here, so let's import theme provider, like this. We'll do theme provider. And then we'll do app. So the way that this works, the way that context works, is that, let's say in here, we want it to access the theme. We wouldn't be able to do that because technically we're not inside the theme provider. But inside of app, as an example, we can access it. So in here, we can access whatever's stored in our theme provider. And we can just add, yeah, so we can do, I'm just double checking because it's been, the thing is, the way that I'm doing it here is the way that I do it, and I don't know if, it's like, the React documentation tends to just show this. There are more like advanced examples, so like, maybe it will show it all, so, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so like, yeah, you can see here, I'm doing the same thing here, so they're creating a context. They're creating a provider, and then in app.js, they're doing task provider. And then inside of here, they can access, so if we go to add task, you can see they're using the context, which is in here. So they're doing it a little bit differently. They're using use context. Now, I do it a little bit differently to make it kind of simple. Instead of doing use context in the component, like you can see here, so you have to import this context and then do use context here. Instead, I'm doing it all from here. So instead of importing the context, I import use theme. And that allows me to use the context. Makes sense. So the big question here now is, what do we actually need in order to make theme work? How do we make it so that the user can switch between dark mode and light mode? So we'll need some kind of state to store that. So const, and then we'll do we'll just call it theme, and then set theme, and then that'll be equal to use state, and then by default we'll just say light. So we'll only do light and dark just to keep it simple. So you can either have, there's usually 3 options. There's light, dark, and then like the default for that device, or whatever that device is set to at that time. So it can, a lot of the times websites can tell, the user's device is set to dark mode, use dark mode. Obviously that's the third option, but we're just going to use light and dark. So we'll set it to light by default. And then we want to do something like toggle theme. So function toggle theme. And that's literally just going to be something like, so if set theme, if it's light, if theme, does this work? If theme is equal to light, then we want it to be dark. Otherwise, we want it to be set to light. That should work, I think. Yeah, I'm sure that'll work. So toggle theme, right. Now what we want is our context to have access to these values. So because we want the children of the context, right, to have access to the values in the context. So we need to give them access to theme and toggle theme, so that they can use theme and they can also set the theme. So actually, I wonder if, no, they may not, they actually probably just need access to toggle theme. I don't think they would need access to theme, although we probably would give it anyway just in case. So we'll go with this. So we need to add a value here. And then in here we need to pass in an object and specify what they can access. So, toggle theme. Yeah. So we pass in an object, this object here. And this object will basically, when you use this use theme, you can then destructure it similar to how we've been doing other things. So like when we do state, actually we can just do it here, we've been destructuring it. In this case, it's an object, so we would just destructure the object. So we do use theme, and then we grab the values that we actually need from that theme. So if we actually put this into practice, we should be able to do something like, so inside of app, we want to do it here. So we can do import use theme. So import use theme from theme provider. That's our default export, which is why we're able to do it that way. So use theme. Oops, we need to do that. So now we can do in here. We can do const, and we can grab the values we need. So what values do we need? Toggle theme. That's about it, really. I don't think we need the actual theme value. So we'll do use theme, and that will grab the context, because we're doing it here. So we use context, theme context, which is up here. We defined it here. So we've we defined it here. We've populated it here by adding this value here to the provider. And now we're using it here, using this use theme function. And then we can access it using that use theme function from any of our child components. In this case, app is a child component that has access to it. Create request has access to it. List requests has access to it. That also means that request has access to it. So you can see how it's really useful if you've got multiple layers, which is why we could have, really, we've got this add vote here that goes to list requests here. Then it goes to request here. So we're having to pass it down similar to the example we looked at here. I think it's at the top of here where we're passing down, similar to this example here where we're passing it down multiple components. We could use context. And so we can basically, in here, we would do something like, const add vote, and then it'd be something like use requests. And then we don't need to pass it down like here. We can just grab it from here, from the context. You could do something like that. That's obviously if you went back and redid this, maybe you would want to do that because that would be the more convenient way. But in our case, yeah, it doesn't really matter too much because it's just a small application, so it's not getting that confusing. But that is how you might want to do it. So now we have access to this toggle theme function. We need to use it somewhere. So in our case, what we might want to do is put it sort of here. Failed to parse source import analysis because content contains invalid JS export default return. It contains invalid JSX. Make sure to name the file with the JSX extension. Is that a thing? I don't know if we need to do that, but we'll give it a try anyway. Is that right? Because I'm not actually trying to use JSX. Oh. Well, I am technically. I need to like it's like trying to load in the wrong thing, I think. I need to do like a hard refresh, but I don't know how to do a hard refresh on control. So why is it trying to get theme provider dot context theme provider dot JS? For some reason, it's still trying to get the JS version. I don't know if you need to call it JSX though. That's the thing. See if I can. I might need to actually just restart the dev server. That's probably why is this so big? Right, restart the dev server and give that a try. Right, failed to resolve import theme provider from. Does the file exist? No, it actually does not exist at the moment. Let's change the main. There we go. Do I need to add the? Yeah. Use state is not defined. Right. Oh, what did I do there? Use state is not defined in our provider, I guess. So it didn't usually automatically brings in what we need, but I guess this time it didn't. So we'll do use state there. And there we go. So if we look in our components, we should see theme provider. Here we go. So we can see in our theme provider, we have state. And then inside of then we have our context.provider, which is for theme. And you can see we've got toggle theme. So we're passing in theme and toggle theme, which is a function. And then inside of app, that's where we can actually use, so we can actually use it in any of these because these are all child components of provider, of the context provider. So we can use toggle theme in any of these. So we could literally do toggle theme anywhere on the website at the moment. But I'm thinking of just putting it up here. So if we want to put it up there, let's just put, we need to put a button somewhere. So we'll do app.jsx and we'll add a button. We can do something like this. And I want to put it like at the end of the row. So we'll do similar to what we did earlier. We'll do flex and then justify end. And then we need a button. And then we'll do on click. So we'll do on click and then we'll call a function which will just toggle theme. And then literally that's all that needs to do, toggle the theme. We don't need to specify the theme because it'll just go to whatever the other theme is. That's fine. And we'll do class name. We'll make it like background. Or should I just do like slate 700? I do text slate 50 or something like that. We'll do rounded. Oh, and actually, do you know what? Yeah, we do need theme. We do need the theme value because we can put it in here. Theme. Like that. So it should show light or dark. And We'll just leave it at that. We won't go too crazy with it because it's just a little. Oh, actually, what we will do though is add some padding. That'll look awful. So px 3 py2 should be fine. Maybe add a little margin at the bottom. Add some space. So is that updated? Now here's a moment of truth. There we go. So it's setting it to light, and now it's setting it to dark. So here's what we need to do in order to get this to work properly, is that we need to go to Tailwind and check what is required for dark mode. So normally what you do in HIT is do HTML and you set the class to dark mode, or to dark, and then when you use dark colon and then whatever you specify here, that'll only take effect in dark mode. So that means that we need to edit the HTML. Now, here's the problem, and you might already know this, you might already have guessed this. Our React application is only in charge of this div here. So it will only populate things in this div, it will only make modifications to this div, like when it uses the JSX and turns it into HTML, it will put it inside of this div, and that's it. It will never touch anything outside of it. So, how do we make it so that we add dark theme, or we add the class of dark to HTML? So, we use something called a useEffect. Now, here's the thing with useEffect, and it's going to be one of these things that, you hear people all the time say, don't use useEffect, never use useEffect. Well, there are scenarios where you need to use it, and it's actually on the website where we were just looking at then. It's called an escape hatch, and effectively, if you need to modify something outside of React, you need to use an escape hatch. And useEffect allows you to do that. Because we can control when useEffect gets called, right? Because effectively it's a function that gets called when a dependency changes. Kind of similar to useMemo, like we used that earlier, but obviously the functionality is different. useEffect will call a function when a dependency updates. So that dependency can be state. So in our case, that dependency is going to be theme. So when theme updates, we want to call a function effectively, and we want to call that function to add dark mode to add the class of dark to HTML. HTML tag, and obviously as things stand, we don't have our HTML tag available within our React application because we're only using this div here. So we need to target this element up here from within here. So we can use useEffect, and people say don't use useEffect because there are usually better ways of doing something than useEffect. So people kind of go crazy with it, and actually they don't need it. In our case, we do need it because we're modifying something outside of React. So other use cases for this might be like if you're making a request to a backend. So for example, if you wanted to pull in all of the requests, so if we stored our requests in a database and we wanted to grab all of the requests from the database, we would send a request to our backend that's connected to that database and pull in all the requests. And one of the things to think about when you're using useEffect is that you're effectively modifying something externally or sending a request to something externally based on React's internal state. So we're modifying the HTML tag based on this theme, right? So React is still in control of useEffect, but it's modifying something outside of the control of React. So it's quite a weird thing to think about, but that's effectively what we're doing. So if we do useEffect like this, and the first argument is the function that we want to run. So just this, a function. And in our case, we want to do like, what would it be? Document dot get element by tag name, I think it should be fine. Tag name, and that'll be HTML in this case. And then we can do dot add CSS, or do we need to do, is it dot item? This is probably like the annoying way of doing this. I'm actually just going to Google it because I know about the document.getElement, but I always forget about it. So JS get HTML tag or element. Yeah, element. Right. Oh, okay. Really? The simplest way to get HTML natively is here's a reference update. To then grab the HTML element as a string, you would do document.document element. Is that really how you do it? See, this is what I was doing. Yeah, okay, that's what I was trying to do, but I guess you can do it easier. So you can just do document element. Oh shit, I don't know what I just did there. Okay, I'm opening that as a link. I guess because it's got a dot in it, it thinks it's a link. Okay, well we'll just do this then. Document element. I guess get the root of the document, so that makes sense. And then we can do add CSS. Is it CSS class list? There we go. Dot add, I think. Is it dot add? Dot add. I think that's right. Yeah, I've done loads of like vanilla JS stuff fairly recently, but I always forget. But yeah, class list, and then we can do dot add. So add all arguments passed except those already present. So we just need to add. In this case, we just need to add theme. Theme to the class list. So it'll be like light or dark. And that should be it, I think. useEffect. Oh no, and the dependency is going to be theme. So when the theme updates, then we want to update this. So we want to effectively run this function when theme changes. So that should give us what we need. Let's have a look at inspector. Oh, there we go. Oh, but it didn't remove it. So what I need to do is because if you do an add, you also need to remove. So I need to remove. Okay, let's just remove all class stuff. So let's just remove. Can I remove everything? There's a thing you can do to just. I think you set like class list. Is it set class list to nothing or something like that? Dot. Well, what I could do is I could just remove it based on like the old state, I guess. So theme. It basically would just be like this, wouldn't it? Something like that. So I guess that works. So the class is light at the moment. Now it's dark. There we go. So yeah, you just remove the old theme, which is just the opposite of whatever the new one is. So if it's light, it'll be dark. Otherwise, it'll be light. And then add the new theme, which is what we're doing here. And then I guess what we can do is we can go into index.css and do like, let's do dark, background, slate. What should we do? We can just like make it completely the opposite. So like text becomes slate 200 and then the background becomes slate 700, I guess. Slate. So what did this need to be? 200? Yeah. Oh. And there we go. Light's not worked. How do you reverse dark mode? Do you just not have anything or? Oh, okay. Yeah. We need this. Okay. I think we need to add this to our CSS. So this will allow us to toggle it, I think. There we go. And there we go. And we can also change, if we want, we can go through and do it fully. Literally all we need to do is change, I think this. Because we're setting the background. Actually, we need to do, I think it's this. So we'll need to. Actually, the background color is right, isn't it, on them? Because if we go to dark mode. Yeah, so it's like the text that needs to change, I guess. So. Yeah, because, yeah, okay, that makes sense because the text it's been set to 200, but it's on a light background, so it's just light. So I think in this case we could probably just put it here, can't we? Not the background, sorry. Dark. If it's dark, then we actually want the text to remain 700. Oh, 700. And then we should be able to just put this on like request as well. So we do request here. So everything inside of this div should be 700. And then we'll do the same thing here. There we go. Keep it simple. Except that is not. Yep, that actually does need to be different. In this case, I think that is actually fine. as it is. There we go. So if we refresh that, change it to dark mode. Obviously the dark mode button's a bit, obviously you can't really see that very well, but that's fine. So recruit request, do that, and obviously these show up now, which is good. And there we go. And then we add votes. And that's pretty much it. That is our application. Easy peasy. Bit of a long one, that, and it's a bit worrying actually, because I wanted to do more like more intense kind of applications built. Like this is a fairly simple one, but yeah, it took a bit of doing. Although this was more of a very explainy one, so I guess that's probably why it took a lot. Well, I don't know how long it'll take normally if I create another application. Maybe I won't explain as much. I'll just kind of assume that because this is more of like a React tutorial rather than just building something. So I have to explain a little bit more, but yeah, we'll see. Hopefully I'll make more stuff. This was fun, if not a little bit exhausting having to talk and code at the same time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I think we covered everything. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.